We're planning to sort of co-lead this session, but mostly what we're hoping to do really today is to answer any questions that came up during the session that we had on Eucharist or throughout the series, and really give the floor back to you all for what, I don't know, has emerged as we've gone through the curriculum this semester. It's been a really good class, and I've been really thankful for the level of participation that we've had each week. So thank you for being here. Let's get started just with a short prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. God, you are the giver of all good gifts. I give you thanks this day, the gift of this community, the gift of your provision in our lives, and ultimately for the gift of your Son. Be with us as we think towards what is next. I always feel like May is a bit of an ending. Be with us as we plan for and think about summer and what is next for adult formation. She emerges. So I know that some of the questions that came up during the Eucharist session, and we'll start there, was about the connection between Eucharist and sacrifice. I don't know if that is still interesting enough of a topic to engage with those who are gathered here, because I think the two people that were actually asking those questions are not present today. So feel free, we don't have to start there, but we will start with just anything that came out of that Eucharist session, if you look back, or anything that you've been thinking about since then, about Eucharist in particular, and then move forward on from there to more general questions.
This is the interactive part.
Yeah. So is it fair to ask for work here? Summarize what about Eucharist and sacrifice?
Lisa's gonna make me go back to remember something that happened before Easter. I'm not sure that my memory consists of much before Easter right now. But how about this? So I think the question on the table, and those of you who are there, help me conjure it back up, but I think the question was, is Jesus' sacrifice necessary? And someone made the comment, well, for me, it is not. Is that?
Well, that's a deep
Yes.
conversation.
That was what we had to cut off because we were out of time.
Necessary for
Necessary. They didn't specify.
our salvation. Is sacrifice necessary for our salvation?
Yes, that was what I heard. Others who were there.
That gets into small atonement theology stuff, which is full of traps and all kinds of things. I mostly think of the crucifixion as saying, as much as it does to humankind, as it does, that if love is insistent enough, sometimes we kill it. Sometimes we kill it, even if love is insistent. I mean, that's what we do to love. It's a freaking. We kill it. Descent. Jesus referred to as love. So it says more in some ways about us. So it also says back to the way I like to think of it. God loves us so much that God would rather allow a part of God's own self to die than retaliate to change God's character situation on vengeance. That's kind of the way I think about a lot of things around the
Yes, ma'am.
We went through sort of the history of what the crucifixion meant, and Some of the time, some people look at it, Jesus on the cross and suffering, that's the heart of the religion, versus other, that Jesus was willing to give himself, and it's more a loving religion, and this was sort of at what was the central meaning of crucifixion. Was it the suffering and sacrifice, or was it something different?
Mhm. Yeah, folks often say, was it the way that Jesus lived that brought about Jesus' death? That it was something that happened to Jesus rather than coming from an intention from God.
I have a question. I wasn't there last week, and I do know that, historically, the Eucharist has been connected to the crucifixion. But for me, the Eucharist is connected to the Last Supper when Jesus is saying, "Remember me." And so to me, the job of Eucharist is much wider, remembering who Jesus was in his life, remembering that he was a Jew living in a Roman society, and the courage, and as a follower of Jesus, what are we asked to do? And to me, the Eucharist then is sort of a way that we are emboldened, encouraged to be able to do those things in our own lives. And I know that there's a lot about sacrifice, but for me, that's not what, for me, the Eucharist is about. When I go to the table, it's really for, encouragement and remembering who I am and that I'm a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, you're right. The motif of sacrifice entered more largely in the Middle Ages, and before that did not figure so prominently either in the prayers or in the practice, really. So that was a somewhat later tradition, and we did talk about that a little bit in the class.
I have a question or a comment, I'm not sure which, but when Christ is at the Last Supper and says, "This is my body given for you," doesn't that represent that there is a sacrifice coming? That he is being sacrificed for us, and therefore we do this in remembrance of what he gave for us?
Yeah, Pam, that is definitely, I think, a foreshadowing, and certainly the gospel writers are wanting it to be such. And there's debate upon how those words got shaped over time, and even some people think that they got retrojected back into those narratives. But I do think that irrespective of that nitty-gritty scholarship that often happens, I think we can say faithfully that it has come to be understood that way, that there's something about Jesus relating himself to the bread and to the wine as an act of sacrifice, and we talked about that as an act of making something holy, suffering, and even death as a place where God's inbreaking love and life come.
I do agree with Ellen, that the opportunity to celebrate the Eucharist is a moment of nourishment, but also of remembrance at the same time.
Yeah, there's a really great prayer. Forgive us, O Lord, if we come to this table for solace only and not for strength. How does it end? For pardon only.
And not for renewal.
Yeah.
It's a great prayer.
I think, for me at least, notwithstanding all of the teachings of Jesus, notwithstanding his death on the cross, if we hadn't had the resurrection, I don't think we'd be sitting here. And so, in order to have resurrection, you have to have death of something. I think maybe all of us have seen where there's been death of whatever, so with blank. And then some resurrection, not necessarily death of a person, but that too. And so we can't ignore the sacrifice because, again, it's to make holy. The sacrament is to make holy. That's what the Eucharist is. And so to remember it is important, but not to say, well, it'd be okay if it didn't happen, because it had to happen. Jesus had to be really dead. He didn't die of heart attack. I mean, he did, but not, he did. If he had just dropped over, it wouldn't have been safe, because people would have said no. But he had to be good and dead, and they had to know it. And so we have this whole theme and burial in what we describe, and to me, you have to have that, or they have the whole history. To be murdered?
Yeah.
No, he had to, well, that's how it happened.
Right.
I mean, that's how it happened. I'm not saying that was the foretold how that was going to be. But because, it's like you said, because of how he lived, he was a target.
It's kind of pointless to say, did he have to this, or did he have to that? Because the witness says what it says. And you could think about that as an intellectual exercise, but ultimately, did that sort of arguments really matter. I used to hate thinking about the crucifixion because I thought it glorified torture and suffering. But what I have come to understand is that crucifixions happen all over the world every day of various sorts. And I used to hate Good Friday because it would seem like people would come to church and they would get weepy over this one very important crucifixion. And I wonder whether or not God would rather us do something about all the other crucifixions that are going on in real time in our world, rather than spend it on Good Friday, weeping about that one. I just come to, once you realize that suffering happens, suffering is a reality in where we find ourselves. And then I get to, well, could I have joy without suffering? And I can't imagine that being possible. Yeah, so that's another game that comes later, which you give up the joy that you experience in this life. If would you be willing to pay that price if it meant getting free of suffering? And I don't think I want to pay that price for my joy. This is kind of getting real about the situation.
Well, I appreciate the conversation, because this is pretty deep. And it's just to have the ability to talk about how we perceive the sacrifice and crucifixion. It's not. I appreciate that I am not told to believe it this one way. That there is the ability to have your own struggle with it, I guess.
The same to me, I've missed a lot of this, but my own family have had siblings ask me, how can you do communion? This whole idea of God is a complete barrier. Action, or in this kind, and it's like, oh, it's not like I go to the communion rail every week and thank that bastard he let his son die. But it doesn't, I don't know, maybe I'm supposed to think about it, but it just doesn't, it's not like the omnipresent feature of Christianity to me. I guess maybe it's more along the lines of being fed and the idea of grace and mercy. And maybe I don't think about God as Father, Jesus as Son. How could you sacrifice your own child? It's more of a metaphor than really happened. But I'm just saying. I don't know. It's interesting to me that they were just like couldn't believe that I could get past that. Maybe I'm not thinking about that.
Yeah, I remember somebody said something about the cross being, why you wearing a symbol of torture around your neck. I just never really thought about it like that. And so.
I've just parachuted into this, so I hope what I'm going to say is actually speaking to what you're speaking to. On Good Friday or the day before Good Friday, the New York Times republished an opinion piece from a year ago on questioning how we view heaven and whether we should view heaven as a place of absolute perfection, fleecy clouds and so forth, or whether there should be some index in heaven, some indicia of the suffering that was experienced on earth. And you said a moment ago, can you have joy without suffering? And the writer's point was that, and the Times published one of the paintings from the Middle Ages of Jesus being brought out of the tomb. And you can see the nail holes in his hands. And the point is that Jesus was resurrected in the tomb. He came out alive. And he came out with the wounds that he suffered. And of course, Thomas and the Gospels we've had the last few weeks. And I think the writer's point was we should just consider whether when we are resurrected, those who believe, might it have more meaning if we take with us the scars that we have physically at least experienced on this earth? And for me, what about the emotional scars as well?
Lyndon?
I don't know if this is, but I was just thinking back to the question I don't remember if asked about, like, did Jesus have to die for our salvation, and did he have to be? And I feel like, I think that have to be, both because he said that he would have to be, and also because I think if you look at the cross and crucifixion, the point here, as Paul said earlier, about the what we enslave ourselves to. And so my view of atonement is about Jesus liberating us from enslavement to sin and death. That through sin we willingly enter into, and that the cross represents the extreme of that. So like the lengths that humans will go to in violence and sin and all these ways that we would sacrifice our own God. And then on the other side of that, there's the idea that God, rather than allowing us to suffer the full consequences of our choice to enslave ourselves to that, sacrifices himself and then enters into that in order to liberate us from it. So it's like on both sides there's a sacrifice. In my piece, when I think of the son, I don't think of it as like a child. I think of it as God himself.
That makes sense, right? Like, and it's the same person.
Right, and therefore saying, instead of allowing you to be completely overtaken by the evil powers that you have to save yourself, I will enter in and release something. Yes.
A theologian whose name I can't remember, but maybe Lyndon or Peter or others can help me, likes to say that the crucifixion was not metaphysically necessary, but historically necessary. Which is to say that given the context and the milieu of who Jesus was and Jesus's time at that particular place, that was the death that Jesus had to die. And there's really no way around that. And so does it fulfill, some kind of like equation that we could create in the sky? Maybe not. but in order for God's salvation in history to be seen and to be known, that is what had to have happened. Is this theologian's point.
That's so helpful to think about. I mean, of course, it's the same person. It's a self-sacrifice. It's not sacrifice of a child. I mean, that's a totally helpful way to think about that. Because I think I get really messed up with the whole Trinity thing. I mean, I get that it's sort of,
You and everyone else.
like, okay, it's like three. It's like you can kind of get there, but that's so helpful to realize it's not like what's his name, the sun on the rock and I'm gonna kill his kid. That's what people equate it to, but that's a whole different.
I somewhere in my 40s, conceived the idea of Pontius Pilate as a moral hero. And your comment, I had not heard about the point you just made, but I think they fit together because Pilate, in the end, allowed the crucifixion to go forward. In fact, he was, the instrument of the crucifixion because it was the Passover. The Jews couldn't crucify Jesus themselves, if that was, I guess, the point. But before he did that, he questioned Jesus and he asked Jesus to explain himself. And Jesus says, I come to bear witness to the truth. And Pilate then asks the great question, what is truth? And so Pilate goes out to the hill and letters the sign in 3 different languages, so he will not be misunderstood, and nails it to the cross, and it says, the King of the Jews. And that seemed to me, he wasn't, in the end, interfering with, as you say, the historical necessity to crucify Jesus, but he was proclaiming the greater importance that this man that they chose to murder was, in fact, who he said he was. And then, in effect, this act bears witness to the truth of Jesus' life.
I feel like that could be a whole class unto itself, Peter. I probably wouldn't agree personally that Pilate was a moral hero. In fact, I think he's a super ambiguous figure in the Gospels, and in many ways, I think it allows us to stumble upon the paradox of ourselves and others who occupy positions of power and privilege. And was Pilate most faithful in going along with what the crowds wanted? Or would it have been more faithful for Pilate to also offer a resounding no? And so I think that has to be grappled with, even if it meant that he might be joining Jesus on that cross. And I think that is, I mean, again, not to make a plug for my sermon, but that is the tension. That is the tension we're up against in many of these readings, right? Is how we, as followers of Christ, participate and enter into the life of the crucified and resurrected Jesus, right? And I totally agree with Barbara that those two things cannot be thought without one another. And it is the life rhythm of a Christian, so to speak, that to be incorporated into Christ, that we ourselves are offering our bodies into that rhythm as well.
Also, the life of Pilate and the life of Jesus are, I don't want you to take this the wrong way when I say metaphors, but they are metaphors for, in addition to being a real life person in both cases, existing at a specific time in history and affecting certain, things with their physicalness. They are examples, an example of love. And Pilate can be also thought of as just another failed human, just like all the other humans that allow suffering and crucifixion to happen in our day.
That he was also, in the end, acting as a Roman official. And one of his principal roles was to suppress rebellion. And he knew that people in this crowd, would like to turn against the Roman occupation. And that was something above all that he could not allow happen. So, I mean, when I say he's a moral hero, I'm not saying that in its pure distilled sense, because most moral heroes are also moral failures in some sense.
All rulers and emperors do that. Yeah, they all go. Truth is too costly.
Well, one thing that always struck me that I was taught was that, the people that were saying Hosanna and the people that were saying crucify him were not the same people. And so around Pilate, we have some of the top important, privileged people in the Jewish community. It's not the common person that's in that crowd. I mean, they would not have even been allowed in to that area. And of course, the other part was that the Jewish people didn't have the right to crucify. I guess they maybe could have stoned Jesus, but they didn't have the same power, the same authority. And then we have that really interesting where then Pilate and Herod become kind of buddies after all this is over. But I think, I read Jesus and the Disinherited in book study, and then we did it again in Racial Justice, and that has had such an impact for me, and really, and that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, I'm really upset with the creeds right now, because it's the life, it's the birth and the death of Jesus. And I guess what I learned from Howard Thurman was that his life was so important. And there's a part of me that's like, oh, I wish I would have had that understanding more, particularly as I went into my teenage years and adult years. And I don't know if that helps this conversation at all. But those were just some thoughts that were going through my head as we were having this conversation. And
you're talking. Sorry, I was just going to say, you seem to be talking about this kind of notion of the existential change that happened once and for all time with the crucifixion of brother versus Jesus' whole ministry. And so, am I hearing you right? And how the church, corners of the church, have paid way too much attention to this transactional thing, and not much attention to what it says about us, and that it's a call for us to change,
One thing that I really love about Eucharist that I think was mentioned in the last discussion was that it is rooted in gift, that it is a symbol of kind of the economy of gift. And the thing I love about gifts and gift giving is that, of course, they're actually much more about the social relations that are built in a gift than about the actual object itself. It's about forming a bond between people. And then there's the obligation once you receive a gift to then also give a gift back. And so it's an invitation into a endless form of reciprocity in some ways, right? And so viewing the Eucharist as kind of an invitation into a kind of life with God that in some ways never ends, that, invites us to also share that with others. And then one other point that I was thinking is that if the work of sacrifice makes us holy, then it also must be grace-filled, right? And so the idea of even encountering the Eucharist and the Eucharist being connected to sacrifice in some ways also therefore means that it must also be so deeply wrapped up in the grace of God, that invites us into life with God. So anyway, those are kind of a couple of points that I had in hearing the discussion.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Taking us away from the individual interpretation of the Eucharist. It's great. One of the things that I love to do in teaching about the Eucharist is really to act it out. And I think your comments lend towards this demonstration really well. We approach the Eucharist empty, open hands, in a posture of humility. We receive a gift. And in order for that gift to remain what it is, which is the gift, we necessarily have to give it away. So it's not something that we possess or hoard or have in any way, but participates in the greater economy of God, which I think you said, Peter, so well. But that continual movement, the social fabric that is built around the giving of, sharing of gifts, the caring and shedding of lives, the way that we are also invited, as we talked about this morning, to give ourselves over to be present with those on the margins of society who are being hit and overcome by the powers, is all about the Eucharist. We're talking about all of that when we talk about Eucharist.
I participated in celebrations of the Eucharist in which the bread is handed over from the clergy to the first person who takes the bread and then passes it on to the next, and the same with the wine, so that there is a gift-giving process going on, and everyone not only receives but also gives.
Experiences themselves as a giver and a receiver. Yeah, I love that too.
One thing that brings up for me is how there's both liturgical acknowledgement of receiving a gift by the person who's given to. We're compelled to say something when one's given a gift, but it's interesting that it's not
like a
codified.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You're right, and I think, definitely not in that particular moment, but the liturgy as a whole, does come at the end with a commission to go out and people say, thanks be to God. And so there is that culmination there at the end. I don't think we often think very hard about what we're doing there. Right. It sort of can become rote. But it would be interesting to think about that happening in the midst of the actual meal too. Although the whole thing is in some ways a meal as well.
It's partly because there's so much space for that to mean what it means to me to you as an individual, and if we're a scripted response, then that by its nature forces you to think of a certain way. Because it could be that you're not particularly grateful for it and it didn't lead to stay, because that's what you need, right? So I wonder, I don't know, it seems like literal person.
Maybe they might have been.
Like space to respond to things.
And some people do.
Yeah.
Some people say amen, and some people say thanks be to God.
Yes. Yeah.
I like to be reminded of, even when I took the Gen Bell or my head at some other place.
Yeah. It's still offered irrespective of you. That's one of the things that I love about the higher liturgical traditions, is that it's all happening irrespective of whether or not you are lending your agency in purposeful ways to it, right? And that is also, I think, true of God.
Cool. And the other thing, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one here that's going to say this, but sometimes it's nice to see from you that it means, first of all, it might not mean anything at all. I mean, the actual might not. And then another time, it's the overall thing. I mean, it depends on where you are and what's going on in your life and that kind of thing. And talk about sacrifice, I keep thinking about we're a living sacrifice. You know, I mean, that's such a lovely phrase. And it seems like it doesn't go together because we think of sacrifice as giving something up, which is. We did, again, if you parse that out several times, it needs to be made whole. Faith as a sacrament, whether it's baptism or any of our sacraments that we don't say it release, you know, it's still to make that occur.
Yeah, and that's why I really love the language of offering, because I think that offering can get to that. That when we offer ourselves as living sacrifices, we are really putting forth ourselves into the economy of God. And so there's a way in which that step of faith, us stepping out in faith into the faithfulness of God, you know, we are consumed, so to speak, by the life of God too, right? Which is interesting to think about it going both ways, that we are not the only ones consuming the Eucharist. Other questions? Yeah.
So,
Probably those nice to be able to say. I don't know, or I don't know. Sure, I believe that, it's just a to have the space to answer.
One of the things I said in that Good Friday sermon is that the church has never resolved it. And so it really has left space for us to continuously work it out in various ways throughout history.
it's also kind of the Anglican way not to nail things down, you know, in part doctrine. Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
It is, and I think the absolutism of some fundamentalist sects, which is intended to make the believer feel secure, actually drives many people away. Because if you throw, I have doubts, there's no place for my doubts. Well, then I doubt that I will remain with that sect.
Yeah. And I don't know that it's just fundamentalists who do. I mean, I think there are some people who just need to have a theory kind of thing.
I didn't even literally turn to
right.
holiness or
Right.
you know. Yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, I was just saying, I see that there's a chat on the thing, and I didn't know if that was a question in the chat or what that was exactly. Oh, no, nothing, not a question. All right, well, if there are no more questions about Eucharist, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions about the whole series. If there was something else that you wanted to recall and bring back into this space, otherwise we will close it out and rotate to what is next, which is Youth Sunday and a luncheon and a picnic, and then some more adult formation to be announced. Yeah, we're busy this month of May.
Curious about your reactions in general to this series about digging deeper into who we are.
I really appreciated this. It's been very thought-provoking and studying in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I only been two of them, but those two have been very meaningful. Appreciate it very much.
It takes adult Sunday school, which we've all experienced in our lives as adults at one time, and it takes it to a whole new order. I mean, it's really been very, very substantive but very welcoming also. And, we feel comfortable responding, although most of us are not theologically trained.
I would just expand that to say any of the adult education offerings that we've been having under your leadership.
I really think it's the discussion that makes it so rich. Part of what we wanted is for it to not be lecture, but for it to be all of us wrestling together.
I think it's been a really rich discussion today, and also last week, the discussion on discipleship was really rich. But I also appreciated the more factual overview of Anglicanism.
Had some good guest speakers too.
Oh, we did.
Claude
Yeah.
Vaughn and Means.
Peter, you up for giving us a quick update on how you are? It's good to see you. Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No, it's good to see you too. And I also, this might be reflective. I just lost my Wi-Fi for a second, so I had to switch to my phone data. So Wi-Fi can be unreliable at times, but I think I'm there. Am I there? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Yeah. No, I'm doing well. I have a beautiful view of the Bekaa Valley. I wonder if it's okay if I turn my camera around to show you the view of, this is a wonderful valley of Lebanon, and you'll see some mountains on the other side of it. And those mountains are the border with Syria, which is incredible. So let me see. I don't know if you can see the view. Can you see that view? Yeah. So I'm very, very lucky to have a nice apartment. Sorry, maybe I should have kept it longer. Sorry. Okay. But no, I'm doing well. And I realized I wanted to actually, when I first unmuted, I wanted to say Christ is risen to you all.
Christ is risen. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah, because I haven't had a chance, so it means a lot. But no, things are well, and it's great to see you. And I've deeply enjoyed this series very, very much.
We think about you and remember you in our prayers, and it's good to see that you're alive and well.
Thank you.
We'll close with prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let's pray.
That needs.
God, we give thanks for this time that we've had together over the last couple of months to listen deeply for you, to listen to our tradition, to learn from new people, and to learn from each other. We know that your Spirit is present in all of that. And we give thanks for the ways that you're continually working in us as you are in our tradition, forming us and shaping us more into the people that you have created us to be. Be with us as we take all this learning out and live it out in our lives. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Nicole.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Peter, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to see you too. Blessings. Bye.
It's so unintuitive.
Good to see you too. I love seeing your face.